two, one.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Simon from Co-working Days, and from our next talk, I have Khalid from Stack Overflow, which is one of the top 50 websites for SaaS tools and knowledge. And he's going to be giving a 20-minute presentation on what they do and also a Q&A afterwards. So please, if you have any questions regards to the product, please go to Swapcard, check the agenda, and there's a section for you to add questions, and we can answer them at the end of the presentation. So over to you, Khalid.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a little presentation. Just bear with me 1 second. And Simon, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
I can confirm I can see your screen.
Great. All right, so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about tools and communication tips for working remotely. Something that I think Stack Overflow does quite well, and something that I've experienced a lot of over the course of my my career working in marketing and communications. So before I get to that, just on background, my name is Khalid El Khatib, and I run marketing and communications for Stack Overflow. I've been with the company for 2 years, where I run a team of about 20 people. Today, our company and my team, like many of you, is 100% remote. But even before that happened in March, my team was 60% remote, spanning 2 continents and 5 time zones. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Stack Overflow in a second. But first, I wanted to share a little bit about me. Like I've said, I've worked in marketing and communications for over a decade. I started my career at Teach for America, a national nonprofit working towards educational equity. And over my 4 years there, every single one of my bosses managed me remotely. It's from cities like Wilmington, Boston, and Austin. And after that, I worked for an agency within WPP, where I consulted for companies all over the world. Working out of hotel rooms and strange offices is a sort of special kind of working remote. Before Stack, I worked for a global consulting company called GLG. And no matter my role, strong communication skills were always paramount to my success. So I've written speeches and talking points for everyone from CEOs to senators. I've moderated corporate town halls for thousands of employees, and I've media trained folks for highly combative interviews. Through all of that, I've also worked as a journalist. I've covered art, culture, and politics. I've written for Huffington Post, Mike, Vice, and Paper, which I only share to really reinforce with all of you that I'm obsessed with communication. So I mentioned I get back to Stack Overflow, where I work today. If you work in tech or on an engineering team, chances are you've heard of us. Nearly every developer and technologist in the world visits our website, stackoverflow.com, on a regular basis to troubleshoot code or tackle a technical challenge. That equates to 120 million visitors a month. And if you haven't heard of us, you may be surprised to hear that 120 million visitors a month makes us the 45th most popular website in the world. Just to put that in context, we get more visitors than the New York Times and Hulu, a fact that really surprised my parents when I took this job. In addition to helping pioneer the Q&A format and the accompanying gamification that's used by lots and lots of websites and companies today, we've long led in the area of remote work. So like I said, before remote work was enforced with the current pandemic, 40% of our companies worked remotely. My team was 60% remote, and our product and engineering teams were actually 80% remote. So we have several guiding principles and programs to support our remote employees that I'll walk you through next. So a few foundational aspects that fuel our approach to remote work. If you're a senior leader at your company, it's really important that you put a stake in the ground to determine if you're remote friendly or remote first, and that you set up policies that reinforce that mandate. First, flexibility and understanding. So before the pandemic, but even more now, folks are generally able to work wherever they want for as long as they want, and to have as long as they have overlap with others and let other people know their schedule. The same goes for breaks, not just throughout the day, but days off when needed. We also allow for special accommodations and flexible schedules for caregivers, and we continue to refine that policy as we extend our remote work policy for all. When it comes to perks, something that I really appreciate the company, and they've done better than any company I've ever worked at, is we really take care of our remote employees. So we allow everyone who works remotely a home office stipend. In this current pandemic environment, everyone has access to that. We allow everyone an internet stipend, and take it a step further. We give everyone a gym membership reimbursement to encourage folks to get out of the house or work out virtually if that's all that's available to them. We also host regular yoga and meditation classes, cooking classes every week, and I'm going to share a couple of tips on social interactions and best practices there at the end of this presentation. And finally, an area that I really focus on since internal communications is part of my mandate is over communicating org-wide and doing it on a really predictable cadence. So when we went fully remote, something that 60% of the company wasn't used to, we instituted regular AMAs where anyone at the company could ask questions of our senior leadership team, questions anonymously. We do that on a platform called Slido. People can upvote them and downvote them. We answer questions in real time, and anything we don't get to, we send out answers to an email and a following communication. In addition to AMAs, we do quarterly town halls where we review the financial performance from the past several months and then sort of look at the outlook for the company moving forward. And finally, and I think this is actually one of my best tips and something that I so appreciate our head of people, Melissa, bringing on earlier this year, is weekly pulse surveys. So at every company I've ever worked, our annual employee engagement surveys were a big deal, and they're super helpful, but they're not enough, at least in my experience. People leave, there's turnover, and doing a survey at one point of time, once a year, can't assess how people are feeling in a highly specific moment, like a pandemic, for example. So we actually use a tool called Office Vibe to send an employee engagement survey out to folks every week. The survey only takes 5 minutes because it's just 5 questions long, and it does a really great job of assessing the health of teams and of individuals. So we look at that at an org-wide level, and then I look at my team on a weekly basis as well. We're also able to run pulse surveys for special groups, caregivers, for example, people of color, and others, like folks who are not used to working remotely. So we can revisit policies as they affect specific groups of people. So just sort of continuing down the path of sharing some more tips. Like I said, we've been working remotely as a company for a long time. And there are some best practices that we've observed individuals and teams adopt here at Stack Overflow. First, you probably don't need to say it, but repetition wins campaigns, as they say, and that's set healthy boundaries. It's really important to set healthy boundaries, especially if you're new to being remote. You'll find, like I did, I live in Brooklyn. I worked most days at our headquarters in New York before I went remote in March. And it's so easy to be online all the time. So what I did and what I really committed to when we went remote in March is taking some time to get my calendar set with available working hours and to make sure that I blocked off time when I knew I wouldn't be responsive. I've also turned off notifications after hours, and I keep my chat status up to date so that it's clear to teammates when I'm available and when I'm not. If I'm taking time for an actual lunch, which I did yesterday, I set my Slack status to a sandwich. Same with a yoga emoji when I'm taking time to work out. And something that took me a little while to get comfortable doing, I'm no longer shy about joining a meeting a little bit sweaty from a long run. It sort of goes to my next point, which is it's really important to keep over communicating and to do so openly and transparently. How are you feeling? What are you up to? And what level of work are you okay taking on in any given day? That level of transparency, in my experience at least, can feel radical or uncomfortable, but you have to be empathetic to the fact that everyone's in a similar position. And besides, everyone is already seeing the inside of your home. So the sort of level of oversharing that we're all doing right now has gone out the window. And also, I think an important point here for anyone who's either leading or an individual contributor is that you have to manage up, down, and horizontally to hold everyone accountable here. So I actually love when someone on my team says, brashly, why haven't you taken a day off in over a month? Someone did recently, and it held me accountable and took that Friday off. And finally, if you have access to it, use an email scheduler. All of us are working different hours depending on our schedule. I get a lot of work done on Sundays, but I never send Sunday emails. I make sure to use that email scheduler to send emails to my team on Monday, and I don't make the mistake of over-scheduling my emails. I know from experience there's nothing worse than 8 a.m. on Monday rolling around and getting 16 emails from your boss. So I try to stagger those throughout the day or throughout the week if they're not urgent. Another tip that's easier said than done is to minimize meetings. So something that I'll talk about a little more in the presentation is that we work asynchronously whenever possible. So we reserve meetings that really need a deeper discussion to move forward. It takes a lot of discipline to say, does this really need a meeting, or can it be accomplished through other communication? But you get comfortable with it over time. So one thing that we really do is use Google Docs to collaborate. We use the comment feature to have a conversation wherever possible, and then more people can jump in without having to coordinate tons and tons of schedules. One thing that I'll say about the meeting advice is I actually think that jumping on a Hangout for 5 or 10 minutes is really key, and you should have a high level of comfort around doing that. So much can be misinterpreted over Slack or over email, especially if you're not used to working remotely. So whenever I say, do you have a sec, to someone on my team, it can sometimes be a difficult conversation, but it can most often be one that just has a lot of nuance. And I don't want to be anything to be misconstrued over chat. Another tip, and this comes from our product and engineering teams, is brainstorming. So one thing that people really miss about being fully remote is being able to gather around a whiteboard and brainstorm together. I know it was a key component of my ad agency days. And this type of brainstorming is super important. So there are lots of tools out there that can help with this. One great example that we use all the time at Stack Overflow is Trello. The product team uses it for design sprints, and we often on the marketing team use it for go-to-market. So we can create all sorts of cards to collect, label, and sort through ideas and feedback. And the great thing about Trello is it's simple, it's intuitive, and the learning curve is really low for anyone on any team to jump in and contribute. And finally, celebrate wins often and in public. Just as our people team did a great job implementing a real-time pulse survey and feedback tool, they implemented a tool called Reflective. So we used to have a weekly company email that consolidated kudos from across every team. Anyone could fill it out. Now we use a kudos tool within Reflective that pushes everything to a dedicated Slack channel. So anyone in the company can give thanks and celebrate each other in real time. And it's been a really positive thing for everyone. So this is a busy slide, but one that I won't spend a lot of time on. Developers and technologists always find it super interesting because so many of them use this every day. The point I actually want to make is there's no one tool that allows a company to function super effectively remotely. When it comes to something as straightforward as video conferencing, for example, we actually use 2 tools. We use Google Hangouts and we use Zoom. We find that Zoom is better for larger meetings or meetings that need to be recorded, and Hangouts is great and quick for small meetings and check-ins. So my sort of high-level advice on tooling, take it or leave it, is to ensure that each tool has a sponsor and there's a central owner of all tools within the company. We should also evaluate a full suite of tools on a biannual basis at least. This is because, especially in this pandemic environment that we're in, a lot of tools are being consolidated and better integrating with one another. So you should always step back and say, is there too much? Is there not enough? And really focus on collaboration and setting up your remote employees for success and productivity gains. So just like I double-clicked on video chat, and highlighted Hangouts and Zoom, I want to spend a second on synchronous versus asynchronous communication. Something that a lot of people are just now starting to talk about is the concept of Zoom fatigue sets in. Running the marketing team here, we don't like to say eat our own dog food. Instead, we say drink our own champagne. And the way we do that is by using Stack Overflow for Teams, our asynchronous knowledge management platform. So Teams is a collaboration tool that helps improve productivity and get answers faster. It is a private version of the Q&A platform that lives on stackoverflow.com. And whether you use it or not, the point I want to make is that chat ops tools like Microsoft Teams and Slack are great, but they're not enough, and they can be super distracting. In this era, attention is a top commodity. Just sharing a couple of stats, researchers at UC Irvine observed that office workers in their natural habitat switched tasks or were interrupted every 3 minutes. On top of that, it could take another 20 minutes to get back to where they were. And if you add all of that math together, interruptions can cost up to 6 hours of productivity in a day. And something that developers and technologists talk about often is this concept of context switching. So we know there's a mental cost to switching tasks, and it can translate up to 40% more time to complete them. So in my opinion, chat ups and constant pings are the biggest offender when it comes to context switching. Chat ups are great. I could not live without Slack, but you need a place where employees can store knowledge and point to in order to decrease all of that shoulder tapping. At Stack Overflow, we use Teams instead of a wiki or an intranet. So everything from our internet stipend policy to the go-to-market plans for an upcoming launch lives in this tool. I can point people to specific questions within the platform on Slack with one click, and I don't have to dig through my emails or endlessly search Slack to find something. I won't linger on this for too long, but it's become a really important tool that connects us across the company, especially in this remote environment. Not only has it cut down on the amount of time it takes for a question to be answered, it creates transparency, which is really, really important right now. And it's searchable. It saves us all time from answering the same question over and over, like I just mentioned on Slack. So we've seen it adopted across nearly every department, but one interesting use case that I know a lot of folks are thinking about right now is as a training and onboarding resource. So we've built in questions that contain all of the information someone needs to get up to speed on a particular product line or a role when they start, now that we're onboarding people remotely. The marketing team has created questions that point our sales team to the most up-to-date sales collateral, technical documentation, and other items that we created to facilitate the sales process. So we actually have a tool within Teams called Collections that consolidates longer form articles as well as Q&A, so anyone can get up to speed on a very specific product or process from day one. And finally, one area of focus for us that we're really, really doubling down on right now is integrations. So we want to be able to meet people where they work. And like I said, our public approach to work, being fully remote and really transparent, means we spend so much time in Slack. I know that everyone is spending time in their respective communication platforms right now. And so we want to make sure that all of the knowledge that's happening there, all of the information that's being exchanged, has a place to live. And I think that's especially important as companies like yours, no doubt, think about business continuity challenges, issues like employee turnover, and folks taking prolonged periods of leave. Okay, so enough about Teams, enough of a sales pitch. I want to get back to communication tips and best practices before we round out. So on top of all the tools and processes that we use, there are several programs in place that we've changed with the forced remote work. So one thing that I really appreciate, I've talked a lot about Slack, is we have a dedicated remote office operations manager and a remote office Slack channel. So in mid-March, when we all went fully remote, many of us joined that Slack channel, and very quickly, all of our remote employees began sharing resources, best practices, and tips immediately. So everything from some of the tips I shared with you early on to the best keyboards, mouse pads, and headsets that we should all buy. We also have Slack channels for hobbies. So there's a pet Slack channel, a baby Slack channel, a fitness Slack channel. And one thing that I love, because we have so many engineers and technologists on staff, is we created our own tool for getting to know each other. We call it Slack Roulette, similar to Chat Roulette of 5 or 10 years ago. And every month we're randomly paired with 2 or 3 other people, put onto a hangout together with some auto-generated sort of fun icebreaker questions, and just spend 30 minutes getting to know each other on a personal level. I've spent time with colleagues in Munich that way, Amsterdam, Los Angeles, on almost every team. A couple of other things that we do a bed bash almost every week, so our version of a happy hour, and we've sort of used it twofold. One, members of the senior leadership team often host the bed bashes, so it's an opportunity to get to know those members. And two, there's often a theme or a little shtick behind it. So I actually hosted the one last week, and we did 2 truths and a lie using Slido. So everyone sent in their questions in advance, and then the 30 or 40 people on the bed bash voted on what they thought the 2 truths and the lie were, and it was a lot of fun. A couple of other things, like I mentioned, we have more social events now than ever. So everything from an empanada making class to an external speaker on best practices for making coffee, to yoga and trivia nights. And then finally, we're thinking now about how we do a meetup in a virtual environment. So last year in October, we got the whole company, remote and office employees, together in Austin for a great 3 days of team building and strategic planning. We're not sure what that looks like in a fully remote environment now, where we can't all get together in person, but it's something that we're exploring. And if anyone has any ideas, I'm all ears. Ping me after the talk. And finally, in marketing, we sometimes talk about moonshot ideas, this sort of Super Bowl commercial or viral marketing stunt. When it comes to team building in a fully remote environment, I encourage you to think about what your moonshot or super creative concept looks like that goes beyond a happy hour or a virtual meetup, which some people are getting a little bit sick of. So for us, that was a recent community-a-thon. It was led by our community team. And so in addition to our technical Q&A site, we have over 150 sites that cover everything from film and TV to fitness and medicine. And in order to better understand our product and bring everyone together, our internal community team launched this 2-week-long event that encouraged everyone on the company, from sales and finance to marketing, to ask questions on our sites to get points. It got really competitive, and it was really fun to see the questions that people asked. So whether it was about sourdough starters, which have been a hot topic of conversation since March, to questions about staying fit, to questions about film and TV. I asked a popular question about one of my favorite 80s movies, Clue, and the 3 alternative endings it had. So I think we have to accept the reality that remote work isn't going away anytime soon, whether we like it or not. So we have to ask ourselves the question, how do you establish a new normal, all while being empathetic to the fact that this will never feel normal to everyone? So like I said, reevaluate the tools that your company is using, over-communicate like crazy, and maybe you have a huge community like us. Maybe it's just a few dozen employees, but practice something we say all the time. Keep community at your center. Thank you.
Okay, Khalid, that was great. A lot of questions are coming through regards other applications people use. And, one particularly from Daniel Weiss, apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly, from Teal Goal Limited, asked the question. He said, we're using the Twist app. I think it's similar, but I've never heard of Stack Overflow. Is there any way you can compare the 2 applications for him?
Unfortunately, I can't, because I don't know what the Twist app is. So I'd be happy to connect with him offline and certainly have someone from my team share differences.
Okay, there's a lot of people mentioning all the other apps that they use: G Suite, HubSpot, Rootlow, ClickUp, etc. And there's another question here: how can 2 individuals who have 2 different communication styles and personalities find common ground to improve communication? For example, one is an individual more laid back, relaxed, while another needs constant communication and always acts with a sense of urgency. Both of them, maybe they need some counseling. Both of them, when working together, complete tasks on time, but the differences creates conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I think every situation is different and unique, and some tension is healthy, of course. I think that it sort of ladders up to what I was saying earlier, that radical transparency is really key. If something is bothering you, I think something that happens when we're fully remote is that confrontation happens much less frequently. because you don't run into each other in the hall or in the conference room. And when it does come to a head over Zoom or over Slack, it can be incredibly passive aggressive. And so I think getting ahead of any sort of annoyances or frustration that the person is feeling is really, really key. So saying, hey, I feel like your constant need for communication sometimes infringes on the boundaries that I'm setting. So I'm happy to over communicate as much as possible if it's helpful to you, but can we make sure that you respect my boundaries, which are these hours, or I prefer email. I think a couple of other things that people have done really well is they've just said outright, like, here are the 3 ways that I prefer to communicate. So someone on our team, someone on the leadership team, for example, does not use Slack. He's one of very few people in the company who doesn't use Slack. He uses GChat. I don't know anyone else who does. But when I need something from him, I know to go to GChat because he's made that very clear. And then I think the third point I'd make is sometimes having a mediator in these situations is good. So there are times when, marketing sometimes has a healthy tension with sales or customer success or other divisions within the company. And we've said, hey, we have this disagreement. We have different working styles. Can you, someone from the community team or the product team, join us for a conversation and help us help moderate the conversation so we can come to consensus?
Yeah, personally, I hate voice notes. That's my personal thing. If anybody sends me a voice note, I just simply reply, I don't do voice notes, call me. Another question here regarding the social events. You seem to have a lot of social events, but somebody's asked, are they all voluntary, or can you choose to participate in whichever event you like? Because I've heard there are also people who feel even more stressed with so many social events.
Oh, yeah, I think it's so important that you make clear that they're 100% voluntary. I think that people should do what they feel comfortable doing on their time. There are people who are highly introverted, and even being on a Zoom happy hour with 40 people where they may not have to say a word can be uncomfortable for them. And I don't think that any company should force them to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done that with some online meetups we've done, where we've even said to people, you can turn off your camera. You don't need to say anything. We just want you to know that we are here for you. And some people appreciate, and some people really, really don't even like that either. Another question here. Do you have a framework for meetings on projects while remaining agile in your delivery approach?
We do. Yeah, every team does it. Every team does everything a little bit differently. The meeting framework depends on who's involved and how large the project is and what sense of urgency we're operating with. I will say the one thing that holds true no matter what the scope is and who's involved is that we try to do as much of it as asynchronously as possible. Yeah. So especially when something is cross-functional, it's really difficult to schedule across time zones and to pull 10 or 12 people into a meeting. And so if we can come to consensus on a lot of the details in a Google document, for example, before the meeting or after the meeting, then that's what we try to do. So the meeting itself can be 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and we can tackle the key challenges or the biggest problems.
Okay, and a question here again in regards to your social events. Somebody's very interested in the social events. Do you have a social event manager? Do you have one person or a role who coordinates all these social events? Sounds like a lot of work. Sounds like a lot of fun as well, though.
Yeah, it is fun. We do have one person. So we had the remote office manager who is largely tasked with employee engagement, manages all of our social events. So he books all of the external speakers and chefs that are hosting and facilitating things. And then he empowers other people to host them. So I think it's untenable to expect one person to do everything, but having a single stakeholder to make sure that it happens on a regular and predictable cadence, which I think is really key. Like we've lost all sort of sense of time. I can't believe it's August. I have to look, August 12th, can barely believe it's, the end of summer. And so I think it's easy to drop the ball. You say, we're going to do a happy hour, a bed bash every week. Easy to drop the ball. Important to have a single owner, but you want to make sure that he or she isn't responsible for planning and executing all of them. So the bed bash I led, for example, last week, he asked me to do it, and then I took it from there.
Yeah, so some of the events that we organize, some people don't even realize they're every Thursday and Friday. Some people are like, well, it's Thursday, where's an event? So it just depends on different people. Some people really appreciate the regularity and can fit it into their schedule. Another question about regards your apps. What apps or programs can we use to track employee engagement on Teams? We don't use Slack, close brackets, for asking questions and staying engaged.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, like I said, we use Stack Overflow for Teams for asynchronous communication, and there's sort of a gamification process behind it. So you earn points and badges for participation, and so it's really easy to see who's a top contributor. In a way that's not shameful. You don't receive downvotes or deducted points for your contributions to the platform, but in the same way that a lot of intranets have been gamified to get people to participate, Stack Overflow for Teams is as well. So that's one way. The other way that I mentioned is the platform we use called Reflective. Not everyone participates in it, so we don't sort of use it as our North Star. But anytime someone receives kudos, it's usually tied to one of our core values. And then on a monthly and quarterly basis, we aggregate the people who have received kudos and say, hey, like, congrats, Lori, on my team. You've received 40 kudos this month. You're definitely doing something right. And finally, like I said, I can't stress enough the importance that we've seen of Office Vibe and doing weekly pulse surveys. Having line of sight into things like how stressed my team are, how transparent they feel I'm being, or what policies are working and aren't working is so important. And I encourage everyone to look into a tool like that.
Okay. Two more questions. I think this is aimed at your social events again. If you have all these great social events, how do you celebrate birthdays? Fair comment.
That's interesting. You know, I think one of the things that I'm learning in this environment is that everyone's a little bit different in terms of how they socialize, how they communicate, but also in what they share and how they live. And I think it's important to recognize that not everyone likes to celebrate their birthday. I'm a birthday person. I grew up in a birthday family. And so I'm happy for people to call it out on Slack and put a bunch of cake emojis behind it. But we don't do anything really beyond that, because I think some people are uncomfortable being sang to or doing more than that. And we have about 300 employees, so it would be a little exhausting.
Yeah, I stopped counting my birthday 7 years ago. What is one thing you can do every day to improve team communication at work? That's a good one.
That's a great question. One thing you can do every day. I think one thing that you can do, and not sure that it's necessarily every day, but certainly on a regular basis, is check in on people. I think that not only are we navigating with unprecedented levels of remote work, but this is a very unprecedented time, and everyone is handling it differently, and everyone has very different personal situations. And so something that I try to do is check in with people that I don't talk to all the time. Say, how are you doing, and how can I make things easier for you? So I think just that level of being accessible to people and helping sort of break down the personal and professional barrier of, like, how are you doing at work? How are you doing in life? Makes people feel a lot better about waking up and walking, maybe in my case, 30 feet from their bed to their kitchen table every day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And your best advice to communicate with an entire workforce. This is a tricky one, including those employees with the diverse needs, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, visual impairments, etc. That's a bit of a tricky one.
It is tricky, but I think that it goes back to the earlier piece of advice that I said, that no one communication tool is going to solve all of your needs, because everyone has different communication styles. And so in the same way that we do town halls over Zoom, not everyone can pay attention to a 40-minute video call. Not everyone can read a 4-page document on the state of the company or review our financials. And so I think giving people all sorts of forums and venues to communicate and take in information is really, really paramount. So in addition to the Zoom, we do an AMA in real time. Like I said, we share a written AMA after. I make myself available over Slack, over email, over the phone. And so I think that just diversifying all of your communication channels and opening it up to people with all sorts of styles is the way you do it.
Mm-hmm. Personal question for myself before we go back into the questions. How do you feel about this new thing? This is what I've experienced in the last few months. Okay, is how do you feel about constant video calls? Do you think that cameras are now the new norm and we have to communicate with cameras? Or is it okay to say to an employer, a team member, hey man, can we just talk? Do we have to have the right backdrop? Do we have to have a camera on?
It's really interesting you asked that. I was at the park on Sunday with a few friends, and we all worked in really different fields. A couple of us, like me, worked in tech, and a handful of folks, this is New York, worked in finance. And what we found in this conversation is that culturally, it's so different. So my sister, who is a consultant in finance, never has her camera on. It's very out of the norm. And for me, I never have my camera off. And so I think that we need to work better to find a happy medium so that people are more empowered to do what they're comfortable with. I'm fine if someone says to me, can we do this meeting with cameras off? And the one thing that I would sort of say though, is I do have a number of friends who have said, I'm so glad we can do cameras off because I take a lot of meetings from bed. That's one thing that I'm very, very, very strict about. I don't bring my computer into my bedroom. I try to avoid my phone in my bedroom because I think that we do have to separate, some level of separation between our personal lives and our professional lives.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's, modern communication has needed some sort of etiquette rules for many years now. And now with the whole Zoom chat and everything with cameras, it needs to be redefined again because, I say to my clients and people in my network and things like that, like I said before about voice notes, I can't stand voice notes. Call me, is when you look at your phone and you've got a 6-minute voice note and like, why couldn't have that been a call? And it's like sometimes, you think better when you're pacing around the house or, you're mobile. And it's like, we don't need to have everything on video. And I think that's going to change over the next couple of months or years, depending on how the world progresses, the use of video. We've just got a few minutes left. So we've got a couple of more questions. What is your feedback about Workplace by Facebook? Heard the best and the worst. You don't have to comment on that if you don't want to say anything bad about another company.
No, it's no problem. I really just have I've never used the platform. It's something my last company evaluated and didn't end up going with, but I don't know much about it.
Okay. And how do you make new employees feel welcome remotely?
That's a great question. So something that I touched on but didn't spend a lot of time with is we do sort of package together all of this information when it comes to onboarding. So we make it very easy for them to access information, to consume in a sort of written format. The other thing that we do is we do a new hire training. So every senior leader and functional team does a sort of 30-minute training in AMA, regardless of the size of the hiring class. So sometimes it's 10 people, sometimes it's one. It was just me and one other individual last week, and it was nice to get to know her. And then another thing that we do is we still send an onboarding package to people. So some Stack Overflow swag, whether it's a t-shirt or a book, to make them feel welcome and like they're part of the company, even if they can't fly to the office to meet folks.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Khalid. That's great. Just want to wrap things up here so we can, we've got a couple of minutes left. If anybody's got one last question, we can take it, but be quick. I'm just checking the chat now. Okay. Is there anything you'd like to finish with, Khalid, or are you happy with what you
I think we covered a lot of ground. So I'm on LinkedIn. Khalid at Stack Overflow is my email address. I'm the only Khalid here. So if anyone has any further questions, happy to be in touch.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Khalid. For everybody who's tuning in, please go through the networking platform and make sure that your details are updated there so people like Khalid can find you and you can find people like Khalid. I've noticed myself, a lot more people have registered and not filled in details. And great. Thank you very much, Khalid. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. See you soon.